Was spending the night at a friend's house as a kid, around 12 to 13. Parents were home, so we decided to go out, do some ding-dong ditching, get in some young antsy debauchery. Get home, and it's around 1 or 2 in the morning. Cue a ringing of the doorbell. Naturally, we think it's the cops or a pissed-off neighbor. A friend had a small window that looked out onto the front porch, so you couldn't really see into from the outside, so we took a peek at who was calling at such a late hour. Standing at the door was an old woman in a dress and a young boy in a weird newsy outfit. Both were dressed extremely out of period, as this was the 90s. My friend had never seen either in the neighborhood before. We duck because we're a bit freaked. Look again no less than 10 seconds later, and they're both gone. Nobody on the street walking away, no cars driving away. They were just gone without a trace. We did not sleep well. Well, Monday I started to worry about my grandpa. The moment of worry passed, and I went about my day. Later on, I posted an article about automated lawnmowers, saying that my grandpa would love this, since taking care of his yard was his hobby. Literally right after I hit share, my dad calls me. We all know this feeling. It's that drop in your stomach when you know something terrible has happened, or it's about to. The feeling that your world has changed and there's nothing you can do. Anyways, he tells me that my grandpa was rushed to the hospital with a bladder infection followed by several heart attacks, but he's still alive. I didn't think anything about worrying earlier, at least until I woke up the next morning. My dream that night was what made it click in my head, I guess. In the dream, I was sitting in my grandpa's shed watching something, and he sits down next to me. Without any pretense, he starts talking. The next few weeks are going to be hard, and they will test you. Don't worry about me. In a few hours, I won't have any use for it. We ended up spending what seemed like hours talking about a lot of personal things I honestly didn't know or didn't remember about my grandpa, most of which my dad and his brother have confirmed to be true, although a little exaggerated apparently. Grandpa didn't die until around noon on Tuesday, pretty much just a few hours, 3-hour time difference after my dream. I'm not religious, nor will I be, but for fuck's sake, what the fuck? I know the subconscious mind can do things like this, but some of the details he told me about his life are things I wasn't even there for, or even alive for. I'm late to this thread, but reading some of these posts have compelled me to post. This isn't my story, but my mom's. She is an extremely rational person, but this event caused her to have such severe panic attacks that she had to return and live with her parents for 6 months. All of this happened a few years before I was born. My mom's first husband was a Navy pilot during the Gulf War. The carrier was about 10 days into its cruise and operating with complete radio silence. She hadn't heard anything from the ship since it left, but that was to be expected. This was a war. On that night, about 10 days into the cruise, my mom woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. She saw her husband standing in the room. It wasn't in ethereal form either. He appeared solid and utterly the same. The only thing different about him was that his head was shaved. He only had one thing to say: goodbye. This whole experience startled my mom and she couldn't go back to sleep. She went to the kitchen to get some water when the doorbell rang. All military wives know what the late night doorbell means. Her husband had suffered a massive heart attack and died aboard the carrier. She was grief-ridden, but reasoned that the apparition had been a hallucination born of the stress of having a spouse deployed. Besides, with his shaved head, he didn't even look that familiar. Her mother and mother-in-law flew out immediately to plan for the funeral and receive the body. She stayed strong until the first viewing of the body. Her lifeless husband was bald. In a letter from his NFO, the shaved head was explained as the result of a lost bet. There had been no way of knowing that his head had been shaved, and my mom suffered a minor mental break. I have a very strong danger sense that's been proven terrifyingly correct both times I've had it. The first was when I was in high school training for cross country. I would usually run by this lake near my house, but one day I was close and got a very strong no feeling. It was like fighting against a very strong animal instinct to go any closer. I turned right around and went back to my house. When my mom commented on how short my run is, I explained to her what had happened, and she seemed alarmed, wondering if I'd had some sort of panic attack. A few days later, police found a body in the lake. The more recent example was when I was riding the DC Metro with my partner sometime last year. We were on the Orange Line and needed to get off at a stop that was also on the Silver Line. We're on the train when all of a sudden I get this very strong sense again. I told my partner about it, and though at first he was skeptical, he trusted me and we switched lines. Later we found out there was a stabbing on the Orange Line that same night. I was watching my parents' dog while they were out of town. My sister passed away in their house about a year prior. While I was there, I witnessed a picture of her fall off the wall. Then I discovered that every picture of her in the house had fallen off the wall, seemingly at the same time. They didn't keep many pictures up in general, so it was only 4 different pictures. I chalked it up to something shaking the house, even though we live in Ohio and I felt nothing. I went home to my apartment. Face up on my desk was a picture of my sister and me that I knew I had packed away. I don't believe in things like this, but this occurred at a time where I was still very much actively grieving the loss of my sister, and it hit me hard. I still can't explain it. My mom passed when I was 7. Flash forward to middle school. We were at this band clinic thing at my mom's old high school. Each school prepared their own piece with their bands, and then we got all the same piece to do together, if that makes sense. Anyways, we were waiting around to get back on stage to play with everyone, and we were just chatting away as a group. I looked over, and at the back of the room was a woman who looked identical to my mom. Same red hair, glasses, height, everything. I caught her looking at me a few times and smiling at me. Turned to some friends about it, and by the time I looked back, she was gone, and I didn't see her after that. Also, I graduated with a French award from high school. I did my walk across the stage. Obligatory photo with my department head, who I'm close with, looking out at the crowd. 3 rows behind my dad, stepmom, and aunt, I saw the same lady from before. Super eerie, but also kinda nice. When I was young, probably around 8 to 10, I caught chickenpox. I woke up in the middle of the night one night and called for my mom, because little kids can't do shit for themselves when they're sick. A woman came into my bedroom and sat on my bed and stroked my hair until I fell asleep. For whatever reason, I thought it was my grandmother, but she was dressed funny. When I woke up the next morning, I went downstairs for breakfast and asked where my grandma was. And naturally, my mom told me that she was at her house, like she always was. I told my mom she'd been in my room the night before. My mom laughed and said that I'd just been dreaming. However, my aunt, who tended to believe that sort of thing more, was babysitting me that day. The upside to chickenpox meant there was no school for me, and I told her the story. She asked me to describe the weird outfit, and it was the nurse's outfit from the 50s to early 60s. My family knew the previous owners of the house. The wife was a nurse in the 50s and had died a few months previously. Can I say with 100% certainty that I had an encounter with the spirit? No, but it was certainly a spooky coincidence. I have a lot of stories, but I'll go with my favorite. My grandpa, who was a tough as nails World War II Marine vet, had a little stuffed bunny. He kept it out in the open, and when he would walk past it and thought no one was looking, he would pet it. Big old tough guy petting a little stuffed bunny in an adorable secrecy. It was an ongoing family joke. Anyways, he committed suicide and we all went to the house to deal with the police, and me and everything. We stayed in the house that night and it had an overall creepy vibe because of what had happened. We were all naturally upset and struggling and doing dumb things to try and make ourselves laugh to try to deal with it. And we realized the bunny has been moving. Like it would be on the dining table and then we would see it in the den an hour later. I thought someone was doing it as a joke, but everyone swore they wouldn't do that, and we never caught anyone doing it. I kept an eye on that bunny the entire week. Never saw anyone touch it, but it would still be moved. I think Granddad was playing jokes on us. Not the most convincing or scary story, but I like it. His cell phone also called his landline. That was weird. Making toast late one night, facing the kitchen bench, eating for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Cleaned up and turned around, and every single cupboard door and cutlery drawer was open. They were all closed when I went into the kitchen. There was no way anyone could have snuck in and done it because I was home alone. I also didn't hear them open in the time I was there. Scared the shit out of me, so I froze, let it register for a few seconds, and then calmly closed everything and went back to my room to hide until daylight. One of the few weird things had happened growing up. Another time, my brother kept having chronic nightmares for weeks to the point where he didn't want to sleep in his bed anymore. They were reoccurring dreams of an old woman who would always be shrouded in shadow and try to get at my brother. One night, I decided to sleep in that bed and had one of the freakiest dreams I've ever had. The woman my brother had been having nightmares about slid up through the gap between the wall and the bed and was trying to grab and pull me off the bed. Woke up sweating and yelling. It was after this that my mother decided to look into it. The nightmares started a week or so after buying the mattress secondhand, and my mother found out that some of the previous owners was an old woman who had apparently died on the mattress. Safe to say we got it the fuck out of the house because that shit was way too spooky for my family. We should have burnt it. Somewhere out in the mountains near Mammoth, California, as a kid, my dad, myself, and a few family friends were out gazing at the stars. Being as I was from LA, I think it was the first time I'd ever seen the stars without light pollution, so was fascinated. Pointed out to a cluster of 3 stars and said, "Hey look, it's Orion's belt." My father corrected me and showed me that Orion's belt was elsewhere, so I asked, "Well, what constellation is that then?" and pointed back to the one from before. He conceded that it did look very similar to Orion's belt, but that he couldn't tell what it actually was. A little while later, what appeared to be the middle star of the 3 started moving, quickly. It zigzagged through the sky for several seconds before its brightness intensified, and then just like that, it disappeared. To this day, the only thing I can think of that it could possibly be was some kind of experimental drone. But this was in the early 90s, and I'm not sure drones existed back then. And if it was a drone, it must have been a damned advanced one because it stood still for long enough that myself and several adults nearby all thought it was a star. Anyway, kind of boring story, I guess, but that's the only thing I've ever seen in my life that I really can't explain scientifically. Not me, but my stepfather's best friend, let's call him Jim, has supposedly been experiencing paranormal activity since he was a teenager. He's a court reporter. Stepdad was a speechwriter, very skeptical and stoic guys. There were countless stories. They got in an elevator full of people in downtown Atlanta, stopped at a floor that was all kinds of wrong. 1940s decor, abandoned, dusty. Then the elevator went back down and opened on the opposite side of the building. Jim's dog died. A week later, the stereo turned on by itself and started playing a song Jim loved to play for his pet. No CD inside. It had snowed the night before and there were paw prints in the backyard leading to the house, but none near the gate. He frequently finds giant piles of coins under his pillow. He lived in London for a time, thinking he'd escaped the spirit, which had begun to scratch him hard on his arms and legs. After 6 months, he found a little pile of pennies in his bed, even though he hadn't been carrying American coinage. I personally witnessed one strange event while Jim was around. I was walking down the stairs and felt something whip past my head and heard it hit the wall. Looked down and saw a quarter dated 1948. I thought my sister was messing with me, but she was down at the lake with everyone else. You should know that I consider myself to be a very rational person. I'm not superstitious, and I don't believe in psychic powers or the supernatural. My best friend, Travis, and I used to play guitars together almost every day. That's not important now, but it will be later. One day we decided to go to the beach with our girlfriends and take some mushrooms. After a little while, when the mushrooms were kicking in, Travis said that he wanted to wander off alone, so I stayed with our girlfriends. We all had a great time. As the sun began to set, Travis's girlfriend asked me, "Where's Travis?" None of us knew where he was, but I could hear him playing the guitar, so I suggested that we follow the sound of the music until we got to him. The girls told me that I must have really good hearing because they couldn't hear anything. I said, "Well, I can definitely hear it, so just follow me." Now here's the strange part. I followed the sound for several minutes into the forest and went directly to him. But when we reached him, he did not have a guitar, and I realized that we had left our guitars at home. I still have no idea how that happened. I lived in a haunted house with 3 roommates. They lived there for a couple of weeks before I did, and swore up and down that a young woman was haunting the house. One of them said they had some incense manually extinguished when they weren't home. Another one said they were feeling around in the dark looking for a light switch and felt the hair on top of someone's head. Someone that wasn't there when the light came on. I, being a good and proper atheist and knowing my roommates were kind of potheads, thought it was all bollocks and that they were paranoid. A month or so after I moved in, I was laying in bed when I heard a girl crying in the hallway. 2 of my roommates were girls, so I got up to do the requisite investigating and counseling. I opened my door to see who it was, only to discover that I was the only person home at that time. Still not a major believer in the supernatural, but I won't rule anything out now. So much paranormal shit happened to me when I was a kid. One that has always stuck was when I was about 3 or 4 years old. Back then, I used to randomly wake up in the middle of the night really often for no known reason. I was still sleeping in my parents' bed at the time, so I would just lay in bed and look around. I swear, every time I'd look at the doorway to the living room, I would see two really tall figures standing there. They looked like the old farm couple in that one painting, except they had hollow eyes and they were thinner. They never really didn't do anything but stare back at me at first. One night was especially weird. I woke up as usual and saw them standing there in front of the doorway again. Only this time something felt a bit more off than usual. The ceiling fan was on high and the blades were going so fast that the entire fixture was moving back and forth. I look back at the figures and they have some really dark, creepy grins on their faces. Got scared and buried myself in the blankets, hoping that they go away. And all I heard was the ceiling fan spinning even faster. Somehow, the beads at the end of the switches were tapping against the glass light cover furiously. I peeked up out of my covers and the two figures were right next to the bed, standing right over me with their ugly smiles. I screamed bloody murder and the glass cover on the light came off and shattered on the ground. My dad jumped out of bed immediately and turned on the light to see what had happened, but the two figures were gone already. I was crying hysterically and took my mom a long time to calm me down. So much other stuff went on while I lived in there. That was the worst house I'd ever lived in. I was staying at a hotel while visiting family. I ran back up to our suite to grab something before heading out to dinner. I noticed my brows were a little off, so I grabbed my eyebrow brush to touch them up, as well as a lip gloss to apply. I sat the brush on top of the chest of the drawers next to the TV stand that sat on the chest. Standing right next to the chest, in front of a mirror on the wall, I applied my lip gloss. I then went to grab my eyebrow brush, but it was gone. I looked under the TV stand, on the dresser, underneath the dresser, all over where I knew I had left it over the course of about 2 minutes. As I finally checked again under the TV, I heard it drop on the carpet like something had fallen, and there, in the middle of the floor, at least 4 feet away from the dresser, was my brush. No idea how it got there or how I heard it drop as I was looking for it. Several seconds later, I noticed it was missing from where I'd put it. There's no way it would have ended up in that spot from where I set it, and I heard it drop after I saw it was gone from where I put it. This seems like a dumb story, but I slept with the lights on regardless. My sister has a rare genetic disease that causes her pancreas to produce insulin like there's no tomorrow. To make a long story short, it means she took a ton of medication and can just pass out, and it can cause serious brain damage if it's not treated ASAP when she passes out. It's like asphyxiation. 10 minutes and she's long gone. My mother came with her to school and sat at the teacher's room all day because she's the only one who knows how to treat this rare disease in my country, in Israel, except my father and some doctor who is like 3 hours away. So I'm in 2nd grade. Me and my sister are in the same school. She's in 3rd grade. At lunch, I sit with my friends and suddenly I just feel something is wrong with her. I have no idea where she is, but I just start running as fast as I can to the library, which is like 300 meters away. I then find my sis at the library unconscious. My mother saw me running like a madman and came to see what's up. She came right after I arrived and treated her. I literally had no way of knowing that she passed out. It wasn't in line of sight or anything. It's not like I might have just started running randomly and happened to find her. I didn't finish my lunch, and I was, and still am, a fat ass. I didn't ever run unless I really had to. Nothing like this incident has ever happened to me before or since. So yeah, I have no idea what happened there. As a funeral director's son, I spent a lot of time wandering funeral homes. As a result, I'm rather numb to the whole haunted house shtick, and I'm not terribly bothered by bodies unless I know or knew them personally. I spent many weekends playing on my N64 in the office of the crematorium while my dad burned a few bodies for a spare shift. Anyways, point of the thread. Despite the abundance of death, my family and I only really had one encounter with the paranormal. I was maybe 7. Some knobhead had lost his keys, so my dad was called to lock up the building. We went with him with the idea of going to the movies afterwards. I'm wandering around. My dad's off checking lights and alarms and whatnot. My mom is looking around the viewing rooms. She liked the picture collages they'd make of the deceased for the family to stand around and reminisce about. I hear my dad say, "All right, let's go." I meet them in a hallway connecting the main viewing rooms near the entrance, and my mom asks, "Is anyone else here?" Employee's name might still be here, but I thought they had left as we arrived. Why? Employee's name, who I forget, was a young woman. Well, I was in the main hall and I saw an old man walk across the other end of the hall from room 5 to 6. Oh, that's Jerry. People see him sometime. Apparently this funeral home was haunted by an old man named Jerry. Not sure why the name. Dad says no one recognized him. It's just a name they picked. He liked to stroll the halls, turn lights back on after they had locked up for the night, and flutter flowers without a breeze of wind. Dad said he might have been waiting around for us to leave so he could fuck up with the lights my dad had just made sure were off. I lived with my boyfriend and his parents for a while in high school. All kinds of creepy shit happened in that house. By far the creepiest happened once when I was alone getting ready for work. I went to the basement to get my uniform out of the dryer. I looked up in time to see an empty rifle case swinging rapidly from a nail in the wooden rafter above. There wasn't any wind down there. I was creeped out enough by just that, but as my attention was on the rifle case, a heavy chain, I think huge links, at least 30 or so pounds, scraped across the floor as if someone picked it up and gave it a big yank. I ran out of there so fast I could have won the gold at the Olympics. Another time, I was laying in bed half asleep and half awake. I could feel my legs sliding off the side of the bed, but was too asleep to stop it. All of a sudden, my entire body was yanked off of my pillow, talking a good 6 inches downward. I chalked it up to me being asleep until the next morning my boyfriend's mom said, "I had a dream a little boy was playing cowboys and Indians with you. He wrapped your leg in rope and yanked you off your pillow." I'd forgot about being yanked until she said that. And sure enough, when I looked down, I had red marks around my lower thigh that looked distinctly like a rope burn.